Do we have any comments from observers?
Susie,
Okay.
did we receive any comments?
No, we did not.
Okay, approve the regular of the minutes for the regular meeting of August 11th. I have a motion on that.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 4-0. Next is director's report.
All right, good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to welcome Susie Rodalisilik. She's our new administrative assistant, and she's this is our first board meeting.
It is.
So I think she's been doing a great job. So I just want to welcome her.
Thank you.
I think my director's report, I just wanted to note how successful the Backlot Bash was for us. And even though, we were limited in what we could kind of really do here compared to other years, we had a lot of strategies to engage the public and kind of the increased foot traffic that we knew we were going to have. So I was particularly pleased with the number of library cards that were created. So I think that was a really successful event. So I want to thank Amy, who was involved, and Jane Hanna from our communications team. A lot of people were participating in that. So,
I really like the postcards that were sent. That was great.
yeah, that was a good strategy. And we reached a lot of people who might not have typically seen this. Strategic planning, I just want to note here, as I mentioned in my report, that we're nearing the end of our current strategic plans, years that it covers from 2019 to 2022. And we're looking forward to some type of strategic planning process where we assess how we're doing, assess our current strategic priorities, our core values, and think ahead to what may be helpful for us in terms of broad kind of strategic thinking. So that I want to mention also, obviously, that big part of that is just the post-pandemic future that we can try to imagine, and what life might be like, what changes we might be faced with, in terms of challenges with spaces, the use of the library, ongoing health concerns, and also obviously the EDI angle. That's certainly an important area that we need to continue to focus on and really strengthen what we're doing. So I think that this is going to be an important season of strategic thinking for us over the next 6 months or so. I mentioned here that typically we do things in-house. And I lead the process. I've led the past 2 strategic planning processes, and I'm happy to do that again. And Laura and I will both be involved, as we always have been. But I'm also wondering, and I'm not asking for board approval or anything at this point, but if you have input on what you'd like to see, if it would help to bring in some type of consultant who can at least kind of introduce new strategies for us or help us organize our thoughts around this. But even if that doesn't happen, we can still certainly take this on ourselves and kind of go forward and more capable. So,
I noted also that some of the staff members questioned whether or not this is the appropriate time to even undertake that process. And so at the appropriate time, I would welcome that conversation.
Yeah, I must admit, I think that there's some logic to that thinking, because it feels impossible these days to think past what we're currently faced with, because it's just so overwhelming at times. But on the flip side, I think that maybe this is the best time to do some strategic thinking, because the world has changed, and we need to adapt and not be afraid of kind of tackling some of those challenges. So there might be a plan where we don't revamp everything. Maybe it's a continuation somehow of what we're doing now with some additional focus areas, or kind of a refocusing on certain areas within our current strategic priorities, identifying different objectives that may fit in with some of our broader strategic priorities. So I think one way or another, it's a good exercise something and we hope something good, and they just don't know what it'll look like until we go to it.
Well, let me just add something.
Yeah.
The world is changing, and the problem is we don't know what it's going to change to. Yeah. 6 months. And,
Wherever.
and my thought is postpone. Because what's the point of doing a lot of work? We don't know what to say. But that's good. The view in which we're going to try to do the work, and it may all change. So I don't think it's that necessary to push forward. It's we have so many unknowns, right? And the world may change in 6 months to a year.
I have a question. As a newcomer, did the strategic planning, who was involved in that? I guess.
So traditionally, we've had a large number of staff involved. So a core committee is established. 2 board members are always part of that core committee, but the core committee consists of a broad number of people from different departments, different kind of jobs here in the library, just to get kind of introduce some different perspectives. And then we always get our community involved. So we've had community town hall type experiences before. We've had questionnaires before. We've had individual conversations with specific people that we know in the community who are involved and kind of might have some insight in what the community needs. We've had discussions with our partner organizations. So we've had like large scale discussions where we bring all of our partners in the room together and have a conversation about not what they want to see the library do necessarily, but about what they're seeing in their organizations, so that we can listen, to what might be happening in the community. And I also bring in the past we brought in experts who might be associated with the Public Library Association or American Library Association. We brought people in from the village. Steve Marciani has always come into the process somehow and to share what he's seeing in terms of like the demographics of Skokie, who's moving in, who's moving out, that kind of thing. So it's a wide range of people.
I was one of the board members on it last time, so I would highly recommend, particularly for you new guys, to influence going forward. But counter to your argument, Council, I would argue against delaying, because first of all, it's a multi-month process. It's not something that, it hasn't even started yet, and it's like a 6-month process. So there won't be anything that, and if we were delaying till a set date, maybe, but delaying till this is over ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna be over. So I think it's, gonna come and go, unfortunately, the way things
Well,
are. So
I would delay it for a set date.
for what?
A set date, 6 months.
Right, no, I'm talking about the COVID issues, et cetera, aren't
Yeah.
going away. So we gotta learn how to deal with them. So I would argue for moving forward. It's gonna be 6 months from now, and so we'll learn during the 6 months, but that's just my.
It could be also maybe something in between of what you're both saying, or what I'm hearing you say is we could start the process as we normally do, kind of at the end of this calendar year, see how it goes, and just kind of be aware that, if we aren't finding that we're landing in a good place by April or May, then it might be okay to just give ourselves a little more time if we're waiting to see what happens in broader society or something. But yeah.
What I do like about strategic planning is it really helps, I think, reinforce what our core values are as an organization and where we want to move forward. And if we have great, the plans that are already in place that I've seen, I think are very strong. And I think the idea of kind of revisiting those and seeing if those are still true to who we are as an organization, and then maybe going into fine tuning those, what those might look like. I think it gives a little bit of flexibility in there too, so that we can continue to, because we might envision something different now that we're in the midst of the pandemic and all of those repercussions that have happened because of it. I think that there have been a lot of changes, and the library has done such a great job of being flexible and working within those parameters and still being able to service our community. And if we're able to at least reflect on those and keep some of the ones that have worked and continue to work, and then we can also fine tune the ones that maybe aren't, or help us now that we've kind of really reevaluated how we're utilizing the library in this pandemic life, what we can do moving forward. So maybe a little bit of everything, I think, would be ideal in my opinion, but I think definitely reevaluating it, because you don't want to sit on these for too long. You don't want a strategic plan going 7-10 years out or whatever, so.
Also looking at the stats that we look at monthly, I was really thinking about that, about the importance of doing a SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to do that proactive analysis to say, given the current situation, yes, it's completely unpredictable, as we've seen over and over again, and yet we must do the best that we can to analyze what we see and to say, how do we be proactive, as I think we have been very well in other situations. How do we continue to be as proactive as we can to the potential challenges that lie ahead of us? So I like what you're saying, Richard, about maybe it's, because I hear what Mark's saying, and that's something that I was thinking as well. And then, but yeah, maybe there's like a middle road to that, because as Jean said, and that's a great reminder, Jean, that it is a multi-month process. So
I
yeah.
think there's some value also in doing this at the same time as our budget planning process. And understanding where our dollars go, like Michelle and I had a conversation. I think that's going to be important too. About where we want to. One interesting thing that I keep thinking about is our when we wrote our plan in 2019, we didn't obviously know a pandemic was going to happen, but our plan was, I'm proud to say, a plan that still was useful, even during a pandemic, and our strategic priorities and what kind of the community, larger priorities that we wanted to see for the community were still like something that guided our work. So that's I think that's something like that, to refresh our thinking on that, but also perhaps just to reaffirm some of our thinking on what we have. Are there, I know we're missing a couple of board members, but if there's anyone who really is, wants to be a part of this process moving forward for the committee, please, you don't have to say it now, even just let me know, get in touch with me, and I can share more information about what it's like, the time commitment involved. It's going to look a little different, probably, maybe some Zoom activity. Although I'm hoping that we can find a way to meet in person. There's just something about meeting in person when you're talking about big ideas, that getting stuff on the wall and writing notes together. So I'll look to start this sometime in the next two months, probably October, November. We'll get like organized and jump into. It usually starts officially like in December. I think a lot of this other stuff is self-explanatory. I do want to mention the art acquisition. We do have an art acquisition fund balance of $14,000, and Vanessa Rosenbaum, our visual design supervisor, and I have been talking about, as we put up more of our permanent art collection at the building recently, we got to thinking, it's been a long time since the library really acquired new pieces. And we also have now some pieces in our permanent collection that we can't put up because we just simply don't have the space for it. So might be a good time to reevaluate our collection, perhaps sell new pieces, fuse the balance upon with a little bit more money and look for some pieces that maybe increase the diversity of our collection, maybe perhaps work with some local artists. So we'll work on that. I'll provide an update once we have more information, but that's something that's getting started shortly. Oh, just speaking of last things, speaking of strategic planning, I was asked to participate in the Rails strategic planning process. So I said yes, and I think actually doing that while we're doing our planning will only help us. So that might be a benefit for us, and I'd like to participate and help Rails as well. So. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. That's a great question. Like local museums, there's Illinois Holocaust Education Center, and we have some ties to them. Like as far as like museums, other museums locally and galleries, I can't think of any connections. Yeah, or maybe if they know what.
There's a Native American one, Evanston.
Yes, I know about that one. Yeah, we can certainly reach out, and I think part of the process of establishing a small work group for the art acquisition group is to try to get in touch with some local experts who can maybe guide us in terms of establishing some criteria, connecting us with some people. Yeah.
There's the Block Museum, of course, at Northwestern.
Yeah, that's true too. The benefit of being close to the Northwestern universities. I think we probably have some people, just patrons in the community who must go to residents who work in the museum industry, art field. I get to try to do a call out to see if anyone wants to volunteer a little bit of time and help us.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, next is approval of the disbursement report of the bills. It begins on page 6. Any questions or comments?
I have a few questions on the bills. So first one is the audit. So that expenditure, can you just share more about that?
It's just our portion of, so that's half of our portion, right? The audit. So that's half of our bill for the audits, of the auditors that are working on our audit. The auditors, just as a reminder to everyone, the auditors are actually selected and hired by the village. And basically, we have an agreement where we pay for their work for us in that process. So, yeah. And that's
We
all.
have to change
That's all.
that, so.
We do, I think it's, I want to say 5 years, and the village goes through a process of interviewing.
Thank you. And the next one is category 6060, maintenance of buildings and grounds.
Yes,
ESCO.
let's go. That's a replacement of a new fire alarm panel. Ours was about 20 years old and the software wasn't supported anymore, so we needed to hire someone to basically install a new fire alarm.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure.
Also 6270 under learning, tree house island. I was just curious because I haven't seen that vendor before.
Treehouse is a online and technology learning platform where people can learn skills like programming, web development, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like familiar with Linda.
Right.
similar in nature.
So that our patrons can access, is it,
Remotely
do they
using the
access
library.
it by that name or is it?
It's
some
called
other-
Treehouse.
It is called Treehouse. Okay.
It's on our website. We've had it for many years. And this is a reminder again, with those big kind of numbers there, that's always usually reflects annual renewal, so that you'll see it once a year. So it's hard to keep track of these.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the bills?
So motion,
Second. Okay, all in favor, we have to do it individually.
Yes,
Yes. Sure.
Yes,
yes.
Okay, that passes 5-0. Next is the consent agenda. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda?
So I was looking at page 17, general operating fund year-to-date budget status. And just taking note here of the capital line where it talks about percentage of budget remaining as of August 21, capital, so percentage of budget remaining for the capital line is 40%. And obviously, we still have a way to go till, the end of our fiscal year, so.
So this year, because of the roofing project, that will basically exhaust our capital line
Right.
spending, and then we'll actually go tip into our reserve.
Into the reserves, right?
So we will see this reach 0%. So the initial expense was mostly for our roofing. For its fees.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments?
Just really what I was sharing earlier, that as I looked at the stats that we look at monthly, just looking at, happy to see that different categories are rebounding. However, still noting in some of these categories that they're not rebounding as much as one would hope to see. And so I'm not sure if that's specific to the pandemic, if that's just changing needs and wants of our patrons, given all the changes in technology platforms that they can access. There were some things that one would expect, such as increase in ebooks, but I was interested that, for example, e-music was not going up, which is interesting. So I don't know if that's because everybody is using their own, streaming services. But it points to, again, the fact of how quickly technology is influencing how people consume information, entertainment, all of these things, and why it's so vitally important that libraries continue to proactively assess who we are. And, we talked about this even before the renovation, how important it is that we continue to be this community space that is really proactively reinventing the kinds of services we're delivering to the community. Right, as their needs and wants change and evolve.
Yeah, and I think the numbers on these statistics will continue to just be very interesting to watch over the next year or two, because obviously we're still experiencing, the pandemic, and people's behaviors are affected by that. And some of the drops that we're seeing in the use of e-resources are also reflective of the kind of unnatural maybe spike we saw during the shutdown last year and the following. So I feel like there's just going to be a lot of strange things reflected in these statistics, and it's not going to seem kind of normal or expected or kind of predictable for a while. You're right, Mara. We have to kind of keep watching, especially like when it comes to the use of our resources, whether it's physical or digital. We have to keep on top of that. Make sure we understand what people are looking for, how people are shifting,
And to your point earlier, it's great that you're going to be a part of not only our strategic meeting, our strategic planning process, also a part of another industry one, as everyone in the library industry assesses
Right.
where we are and where we head.
Yeah, I think there are more question marks than answers these days.
In all of the
Not just our
society.
field, but. every
No, in
field.
all of the society,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
How many in-person programs? Student programs?
Page.
It's at the bottom of page 24. Over in the left-hand corner, we had, for July and August, we had 175 virtual programs and 98 in person.
You see that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Total in-person
Oh,
programs.
okay.
So we've definitely been increasing the number of in-person programs and we'll continue to in September, but also because of kind of the state of where we are with the pandemic, we're being very cautious too and reevaluating. Some programs may shift to a hybrid or virtual model. Some may remain in person when we can safely do it. So it'll just be something that will continue to be as flexible as possible.
I think, yeah, where we can, the hybrid model. I see that working in other places, allowing for the different needs again and the different comfort levels of people. It's important.
Yeah. We do. We have many of our programs are have a max or cap. It's a space consideration.
Programs to make sure.
It just happens that Amy Kuster, our learning experiences manager, is in the room, so we're all looking at her.
Tech support, yeah.
She's here for tech support, but she's the best person to answer that.
Yeah, so we started bringing back, I'm thinking specifically of in-person events, which are the ones that have a smaller group size, although we do have some virtual ones for kids with a smaller size, just because of what's developmentally appropriate for that age group. And what we're seeing is our story time and our book babies, as kind of word of mouth spreads and people test it out, see what safety precautions we're taking, and feel comfortable. We're really starting to build regular attendees. So getting towards our 12 kids in Thursday afternoon story time. And we have 2 6-person max book babies every Wednesday morning that we're purposefully making sure we can relocate even as the roofing project goes on, because already there's been really strong community there. So
The roofing project, as Amy mentioned, will present a challenge because some of our programs we're planning to have in the courtyards and our newly renovated courtyards. And although obviously there's no roof above the courtyards, the roofing activity will sometimes, kind of dust might fall into the courtyard. So we have to protect the courtyards and cover them up or close them down. So it's unfortunate, but we have to do what we have to do. And then we're looking forward to when we can open everything up after the project.
For the longer term.
Yeah, we have to think about the longer term. We'll adapt. We're good at adapting these things.
Yes, we will.
Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second,
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
I,
Okay, that passes 5-0. Next, we're going to make a change in the agenda and move up, it's on page 31, approval of story time room cards. You want to do that?
Sure, we can jump to that. John Shields is here as well. That'll be a longer discussion, I imagine. So as I mentioned, we've been discussing, first I want to welcome Jay Ryan, our local artist Jay Ryan. I don't know if you want to pull up the chair or is it Dean if you'd like. But we've been working with Jay for a while now, ever since we were starting to vision what the story time would look like. We had an idea of painting the inverted dome ceiling to just really maximize the effect that the light changing lights might have on the ceiling. And so Jay has spoken with us and had conversations with our architects and a lot of kind of iterations, but I think we settled on something that we're all happy with. And then in the midst of that conversation, we also had conversations about adding some of these characters that Jay is well known for and are also on our bus or bookmobile.
You're the creator of our bookmobile characters.
Yes.
What a pleasure to meet you. We're spreading joy all over Skokie and beyond.
We want to spread that joy in the Storytime community and make that connection to the bookmobile actually, because so many kids love those characters.
Yes.
And so.
And adults, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah, of course. And so we work with Jay on that. And Jay, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about what you have in mind. For
The process was very, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. Thank you very much for thinking me for being involved in the Storytime room. It's a beautiful room. ABA has done a great job on designing it. I'm excited to be doing the dome. And we went through a number of different iterations of Richard mentioned, starting with something that's very representational and sort of moving to something that was more like a sky with trees, and with feedback from the children's librarians and from the architects. We kept carrying it back to more and more a level of abstraction that's not going to be distracting to children and is going to serve as a surface for the projection of the light, the rings that are the light that are built into the soffit there. And yet, people kept bringing up the idea that we wanted to have a tie-in to the bookmobile and the book bike and the characters that are represented there. So we looked around the room, and it's a beautiful room. It's got all this wonderful wood paneling. It's got brick walls, and there was not any sort of clear place, no clear blank wall that needed to be addressed or anything like that. Also know that this room is going to serve a number of purposes for different groups going in there. And so I was thinking about the idea of flexibility, the idea of being able to have characters for children to connect with, but at the same time have them be something that's not permanently up there. So one of the solutions we've discussed was creating interchangeable figures that can be hung on the east wall. There's a beautiful panel of plywood, similar to the way this sound baffling is here. The top of it has a nice clean lip. And what we've discussed is a number of characters similar to this that can be hung by a children's librarian. And if this is the one that's appropriate for story time today, that's great. But if it's story time tomorrow, when it needs to be a superhero or a still person or a tree, or we have a number of options that have been discussed. We've got a bracket design where this can be easily mounted, basically hung right on the top of the plywood and then interchanged as it's appropriate for whatever the room is being used for, or it can always be put away entirely in the closet that's right behind the wall. So the figures that we've been discussing up to this point have been a small rabbit that's sitting on one of the cushions that's already in the room. We call that one a good listener. There's a tree that's actually the favorite of the librarians that I've talked to thus far. There's a tree with a character popping out the top reading a book. There's a call out to the bookmobile with a squirrel sitting on a flying book. This cat, a superhero who's caped and flying, an astronaut, dinosaur. And then we've also discussed as alternates, a sun and a moon, monarch butterfly, or a snow person. As you've seen some of them that have been sent to you. So that would be a way to tie visually the room to the bookmobile, while at the same time not tying the room down to a specific aesthetic or a specific set of characters.
Right. And we haven't finalized the selection of characters yet, but for the purposes of this approval, we agreed on trying to settle into 8 characters, so we can get a firm number for the board to consider. And I just want to point out that Jay's been very generous over the years since the bookmobile. That was a project we did together in 2016, and so for 5 years, you know, he's been so generous with allowing us to use the characters on the bookmobile in various ways, publicity materials, bookmarks, magnets. We brought some, I think Susie, I don't know if they have other, that we brought some selections. So answer questions together, but if the board would like, I recommend approval of the Storytime room artwork at a total cost of $14,800. And we do have money in our renovation account that we can use for this purpose.
Okay, and that includes materials.
Yes.
And that includes hand painting the dome too. It's kind of a labor-intensive process.
So Jay, the dome is going to be this
Correct.
kind of abstract
Correct.
pattern.
So ADA's ask was that there's a substantial white space that the revisions on this particular design included thickening the white lines a number of times to make sure that there's white space to interact with the lights that will be shining on that dome. The idea with this pattern is that it can be flexible, whether it's waves or grass or waves or grass or water, yeah, or call it, a rainbow, depending on which of the lights are engaged. And so, but I wanted something that's sort of moving, like it moving as opposed to something that's static. It's also, the pattern is reflected in the background of the bookmobile in the sky. Of the bookmobile has a very similar sort of a layout, but that colored that way that the library sun would be distracting to sort of have it be that whole.
I see.
Keep it more subtle.
And so we're envisioning, is there different color lights that we're eventually going to be putting on this?
The lights down there, they're beautiful.
It's all there.
See that.
We have like I think 10 different settings.
Okay.
We can do water, wind, fields of grass, like they said,
Sunrise, sunset.
sunrise, sunset.
So very adaptable to the stories that we're sharing with children.
Exactly.
We have this button on the. Yes.
For the dome, what we have to do to upkeep.
Wouldn't expect anything, expect that when we get up there with the scaffolding and I'll do a projection on the ceiling and then it's a bunch of hand painting. Then I'm going to get up there a week or two and then it should be like any other major ceilings. Good to go.
50 years, we'll have to have you come back in the store to the original.
If I can get a letter. I think I'll do it for free.
Right.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I just have to say that I'm very impressed with how much time and effort and thought went into really creating a multi-sensory approach for the participants. I think that that's very thoughtful and engaging, and I love it. Thank you so much for offering to be able to do this again and for us to even be able to use your characters on, publications and things like that we have here at the library. So I'm really excited to see how this will turn out. I love the idea of being able to change out the characters based on whatever's happening. And also the idea of being able to put them away if we're using it for a different purpose. So I love the ideas.
I do too, in this picture of the children, I can just imagine them going,
Right. What characters are gonna be up today?
right, and really engaging their imagination.
That was something I did not mention before. I forgot. One of the ideas in mounting them to the wall were to keep them out of little hands and not in a situation where they're gonna get knocked over or tumble on anybody. So it's up and out of the way. Or I forgot that I brought some postcards of some of my other work, just so you have a little bit more context. I am a my business is here in Skokie on Main Street. I've been here for 14 years, and main thrust of what I do is, I'm sorry.
No, we got it.
Thank you.
Okay. So the main thrust of what I do is make concert posters for rock bands around the world.
Wow.
And then-
Interesting.
And then the library. And
Right.
what a repertoire.
Yeah, really.
But what are your favorites?
Really actually are. Very happy to be in Skokie and feel the tight in this community. So I live in Evanston, but my family comes to SPL. We do all our library visits here. And, so
I think that's just a huge bonus for us to be able to work with the local artists.
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you. This is delightful. Thank you.
Okay, can we have a motion? Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, Gene? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
thank
that
you.
passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, next is review of the renovation construction budget, page 27.
So I want to welcome John to the meeting. Yeah, please. John. John.
It's not too hot, just warm.
John Shales of Shales Construction. You all have met him before. His company obviously oversaw, his firm oversaw the construction management of the renovation. Obviously, we're very pleased with. And so Josh couldn't make it today, but I think this is, but since John was going to be here anyway to talk about the building review, just not related to this topic directly, but figured he could fill in for Josh. So there's not really a lot to report here other than we wanted to give you the final numbers on the project. So just a reminder that the bond proceeds were 17.7 million. On top of that, so that was what the original construction budget was based on, and that's the number that we tried to stick with, in terms of keeping the project coming in under that. All along, from the early stages of the planning process, we had talked about if there are other pieces of the project that made sense for us to later on have board approval of separately and out of use of our own existing reserve funds, then we would take those on kind of as an add-on to the project cost. So you see those next with what it says board approved expenditures from existing library funds. There were 3 different items there that the board approved. And then we had a little note here about the insurance reimbursement received because that was also kind of incoming money at some point. So the project total ended up being $18,361,774. And because we didn't spend all of our contingency money during the project from the original proceeds, we were left with $39,000 approximately of contingency that wasn't spent. So essentially we came in $40,000 under budget from our original budget projections. On top of that, earned interest from the bond proceeds in our interest-bearing account that we had it in. And especially when we had the full amount of 17.7 million in the beginning, it was nice to earn interest on that amount, of course. So we ended up with $124,134 of earned interest. So currently our balance stands at $163,974.87. Blythe, I don't know if you, this is all prepared by Blythe, by the way, our finance manager. Feel free to jump in if you want to add anything.
It was also at the beginning better when the interest rates were higher.
That's true, right?
I mean, we were making a lot more interest at the beginning.
Exactly. Interest
If
rates were
interest
higher.
rates had
and-
stayed up, then we would have made more, but
Right. So our current balance of funds remaining is, quite substantial there. We have a few things that we paid for out of that budget, that remaining balance, cable shade, which is the South Courtyard shades that the board approved last month. We see that deduction. We had a couple of lecterns, that type of lectern that we ordered for 2 more of our rooms, and that was deducted. And then we added a couple of outdoor entrance mats to help add another tier of kind of walk-off matting so that people won't bring dirt and debris kind of the outdoor elements into the building on the carpet. So those just came in this week, I believe, were installed. So you might have noticed them at the entrances. So, after deducting that, we have that remaining balance of 147,000. And right now, there are no current plans to spend that money. If something comes along, so artwork will come out of that as well, so that will deduct $14,000.
Where are you gonna put the money?
Well, we have it in our existing bond account, but it's up to the board really of what you want to do. We can, my recommendation would probably be just to let that money sit in that bond account for now. If we're still obviously just, first year of post renovation night, but if something comes up, piece of furniture, some minor work that we didn't anticipate, we could use those funds. But it should relate to the renovation, kind of extension of the renovation, obviously. So at the end, the board can decide to transfer that money into our operating fund or reserve fund. It's not necessarily something that you have to do immediately. So.
I know we talked last time about renovating the 3rd floor. Can you remind me again what our decision was on that?
Well, there was no formal decision,
Yeah.
but there was just kind of an acknowledgement that we will have to address the 3rd floor at some point. You made a good point, that we probably should work with the architect just to have some planning, master planning, so to speak, about the 3rd floor. Figure out exactly the scope of the work that we want to do. We can probably work with SMC if the board would like to do some early cost projections and figure out what this is going to look like, the timetable. But right now, there has been no further movement on that. We haven't even had a conversation with the architect yet. So.
Okay, thank you.
But we're not gonna do a complete job.
No, I really don't anticipate that. I anticipate, and it's not going to be more just simple cosmetic stuff because we do have to replace flooring and lighting and ceiling work. But I don't imagine knocking down every wall down there. I don't think that's
We're not moving a ton of pipes or.
No, I don't think that's needed.
We have to vote on this.
Regarding leaving the money in the current bond, how long, what's the timing on the?
I don't know. I mean, if we think in a year or so, or, I wouldn't leave it for 5 years. It doesn't seem to make sense. But as Richard said, we have a couple other things like the artwork for the dome and stuff like that. So I would think maybe within a year. And whatever the board then wanted to do to vote on.
So we're not locked into having to leave it for 5
No.
years, 2 years.
No,
We
we
can
don't.
move it in.
I don't recall, like, but do you recall how long we had the 2001 bond account? Was that wasn't the original bond account that we had that money?
You see, I tried to look in the history, but when that money came in, our present accounting system wasn't in there. I personally feel that like 136,000 was interest from the very beginning, that just always sat there. And then every year when taxes came in, they put the tax and they made the debt service payment. So that's what I always felt that money was from. Obviously, we closed that out because that was done as of 12/1 of last year.
We can revisit this in a year, but for now, as long as it's earning interest, and I don't think it hurts to just keep it there. But it's not, like I said, there might be some smaller things that we might need to spend it on.
We have to approve this.
No, this is just for information purposes. It's just to provide kind of a closeout with what the numbers look like.
Any other questions on that? Okay, let's move on to the building review.
This is actually what John primarily came here for, and thank you again for being here. As I mentioned, I think a meeting or two ago, we hired Sheriff McNutt for basically a renewed capital asset type building review type service, And John, do you want to share just a little bit? They've seen the report. It's in your files, board members, but so they've seen the report, they've seen the cost spreadsheet. Obviously, it's in front of them now, but if you want to say anything about the process or want to highlight, you don't have to go through the whole report, but if you want to highlight anything.
Sure. I'd be glad to go through the whole report, but take about 2 hours. I'll refrain from that. So what we do, I just give you a big picture. We go through it and look at your building top to bottom. We brought in 5 different people, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, an elevator person as well as myself. I'm a structural engineer by training. That's my degree, been in the construction side all my career at that point too. So we bring in all those eyes to just kind of look at your systems, look at your building, take just a different view from Tim, your facilities person, people that are walking the building all the time. We tend to see things a little bit differently and kind of highlight those things. We also had your report that you did from about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Well, just to kind of document what are those things that you did do and what things hadn't been done. For instance, the asphalt was written up in that report. The asphalt's still in our report. It still needs to be attended to. So that's in the ultimate goal of that is this report, of which the body of it includes some pictures and some narrative, some of the things that we found. But really, the most useful piece of it is that sheet that was handed out. And this is really a tool to help you try to figure out and plan for some potential bigger costs that could be coming your way in the next 10 years. We recommend that this type of report is updated every 3 to 5 years so that you always have that kind of longer view, but also the short-term view. So I'm just going to highlight a few of those items. One of the things that we just talked about is that 3rd floor renovation project. We just did plug a number in there. That's 810. That 828,000. I'm sorry. Let me back up one more time. Just the way this report reads, this column in the gray is budget pricing based on today's dollars. And then we use an escalation factor as we plug it into the time frame out. We do escalate that at a 3.5% compounding rate at that point, which normally is rather conservative at our current time frame. It's less conservative at that point.
That's for potential increases in costs of labor and materials.
Labor and materials and things like that.
So just to get it straight, in order to come up with the cost of flooring, painting, ceiling updating, you don't add the 800, the 828.
No,
It's 800 at today's cost, 828 projected for 2022.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody follow that? That's one of those things that I know other people, I present reports like this about 5, 6, 7 times a year, depending on what's going on. So just want to make sure that that's understood.
But again, given the supply chain issues that all these industries are having, to your point, the 3.5%,
Yeah, so this report is kind of like, I'm gonna say higher level than some of those short-term things, you know, like lumber was way up. It's actually most of the way down, halfway down at that point. Metal is still up. You know, some of those things are fluctuations that are kind of within a year typically. Metals kind of stick around, metal increases are up a bit. So I haven't tried to factor those things in because they'll be irrelevant 10 years from now, right? Towards the end of this, it's a little bit out there. So yeah, the short term is a little bit more kind of sketchy. Is that, it's not a great answer, I know, but it's kind of how
It's realistic though, right, given the situation. Okay, thank you.
Well, and keep in mind, especially on that one, like that third floor, that A10, you know, there's no architect involved. We didn't sit down and talk through, okay, what do you want to do? Where are you going to move walls? What walls are we keep? We didn't get into any of that level of detail. This is more like, this is the number of square feet you have, what we're seeing in the industry. It's about this cost per square foot and applying that. So it's a lot of bigger, higher level type pricing in this stuff.
We won't know specific pricing for a lot of these things until we bid them out. So whether it's construction or repair work that's over 25,000, we have to bid that stuff out. So, and sometimes the numbers come in, you know, because we do competitive bidding, sometimes the numbers will come in more than what we projected. But that's in my experience.
Well, and once there's more details, we can tighten up budgets. Right. Yeah, and really theory. One of the other factors that is kind of systemic in this type of tool is the year that you plug them in has a little bit of arbitrariness. You know, so for instance, one of your bigger costs are your elevators. Could your elevators, especially your oldest elevator, the one that goes from the basement level to the first floor in your single-story building, could that last 5 more years? It could, but it's really past its useful lifetime. If you want to be proactive, it would be better to address that sooner rather than later would be our advice. And if that elevator fails, when an elevator fails, it's a 3 to 4 month duration to publicly bid, get a contractor in place. Right now, it might be longer than that, get the parts and materials, which have been hard to come by, and then get it fixed. So in that scenario, with that elevator from the basement to the first floor, you don't have any redundancy. You don't have another elevator that services that level. So, that's some of those service things that you have to factor into these things too. And I know that's one of the things when we got together with staff just to talk about that. Well, let's move that forward because the lack of redundancy, the age of that equipment and whatnot really should be closer on the horizon than farther on the horizon. So your other 2 elevators that, right down here, you have 2. You have built-in redundancy. Even your 4th elevator, which would be the staff elevator or equipment elevator, does not serve the 3rd floor, it's just the 1st and 2nd floor. So you still have some redundancy with the public elevators. Maybe not perfect from a service wise, but you do have some redundancy. But you do have 2 really beyond their lifetime elevators that you need to be planning for replacing them. Whether it's next year or 3 years from now, that's cash flow, that's availability, that's those kinds of things, but we're trying to get it on your horizon a little bit earlier.
And just to, I think I mentioned this before in a prior meeting, but the staff, the basement staff elevator and the pavement project are definitely things that Tim and I would like to pursue this next year. And so as John said, this takes months to plan out and bid out a project like that. So we'll plan to do that work. And then when we have some information for the board to consider, we'll bring it for you. But just want to give you a heads up that in the upcoming year, you will see some type of proposal.
So Richard, that's EL3 and then you said pavement, so A8?
That's right. Yeah, and that's the full west parking lot, the south driveway, the east driveway.
And with regard to pavement, we didn't do any destructive testing, we didn't cut any holes in your parking lot and whatnot. But just from industry experience, with what you're seeing out there right now, you're not seeing a failure, in my opinion, of the stone base below the pavement. It's really just the surface. So, this price really gives you the ability to replace that surface, get those things taken care of. Maybe the spots that got soft over time would be normal, but you don't have a systemic failure of the whole system. So it's still in good shape, but it needs to be serviced. Yeah, so that's one of the bigger items. One of the other items that we talked about it through this renovation project, is the A4 replacement of the older windows on the main level. In the single-story building, you do have single pane glass. You know, their ceiling, floor to ceiling pieces of glass are huge pieces of glass. They're not insulated. They do condense in water. It's a little unclear if they are tempered glass. By today's standards, those would be tempered. That would mean if it did get hit, if it was cracked, it will break into small pieces that are not shards, not sharp at that point. It's a safety type glass or some form of safety glass. It's unclear if those panels meet that. To our knowledge, nobody's ever broken them, thankfully, right? But it's not always an energy efficiency thing, it could be a safety factor, just to make it work.
And but can you talk about the window sealant maintenance, because that relates to that too.
Yeah, so on this side of the building, this would be the 3-story side, first floor, you do have insulated glass. Some of those panels are some of the first generation of insulated glass. It's been very rare that I've seen them. You can kind of see some of the interior to it. And then some of them have been replaced too. So those panels, even though they're insulated, they do need maintenance. Some of the caulk, and if you look at the pictures too, you kind of see some of the caulk that goes between the pieces of glass and the frame really are coming loose. It needs significant maintenance. So this would be on the bottom of my page 2. I'm not sure what page it is in your books at that point. There's just normal upkeep to those things. The older those panes or the framing system gets, the more attention they need to kind of keep it sealed, keep moisture from getting in. The worst the thing that will break these panes of glass the most is water infiltration and freeze thaw. So water gets in, it sits, it freezes, it just cracks the glass out. So keeping those sealants, this building is really in good shape because you've got large overhangs. So there's not water, rainwater kind of running down the face in the rain. So that's great, but there's still chances for water infiltration and whatnot, where you need to keep those box rooms sealed. Your third floor, which would be your newest, 2001, those windows are still in great shape. The gasketing is still in great shape. A lot of times we see that shrink up. You don't have that. So those really should, I'm not forecasting a lot of maintenance on those, even though they're 20 years old. Any questions? I mean, I could literally talk for days. I won't do that. I hit a couple of those things. The only other one maybe I wanted to point out, I really want to get on that far horizon, is under the HVAC systems. Your systems are really in good shape overall. The H2, there will be at some time in the future, we put it out there about 10 years that you will need a chiller replacement at that point. And that's a big dollar item. So that's one of those things that's nice to have on your horizon. Okay, let's not forget about that. You know, could it go 12 years? Absolutely, it could go 12 years, but sometime in that 8 to 12 year range.
We do have some redundancy there because we have 2 chillers.
The last thing I want to mention is that we did try to group these in a way that makes sense on a purchasing standpoint. So for instance, grouping some of these things like your exterior, you know, if you're going to do the pavement project, I would be recommending that you repair the retaining walls, do some of those things, because I think you have better buying power to buy it out as a project at that point. Certainly from a cash flow standpoint, you can split those things apart, but there might be some reasoning. And while you see some things kind of in that same year, we think you could buy it out better as a group at that point. You'll see that in electrical a little bit and some of these other different trades that combining them the same year might be helpful too, but not necessary. That's at your discretion.
Looks like it's front end loaded in terms of what needs to be done. Am I correct?
Yeah, so some of those things are more immediate needs. Yeah, for sure. Part of that is it's a little harder to predict the future, right? If you give me three more years, you'll be able to dial in some of those other things at that point. It's just kind of built into this type of system. But you have discretion too. So even like A10, the finishing of the third floor, does that need to be done next year? It doesn't. You know, a lot of that you keep going for the 5 years. So then that would push that back. I think I would also say that me and my team have a tendency to want to hold those to the front end of those so that you have a little bit more planning power, even if you do have to push back a year or two. It's not, if I put it at the end of its cycle and it comes in sooner, that's a worse surprise than, push things back. So I think that goes.
What else is in that category?
On the discretionary side?
Yes.
So H1, I would say that one is more of a discretionary. That's add some isolation valves to hot water piping. It's relatively a big number. We kind of put it out there about 5 years. What that would do, so that item in and of itself, does it improve heating? It doesn't. Does it improve anything that you would feel or a client would feel? It doesn't. What that does is if you do have a failure on the hot water side, you won't be down without that hot water or the heating side for as long, because they'll be able to isolate systems and replace equipment much easier. Right now, they'd have to drain your entire system. They'd have to, it's a ton of work to get pieces of the equipment out to replace it because you don't have the isolation valves. So it's one of those things. You have to do it now. You can wait for that failure, right? You can do that too, and then add the valves then. That's certainly a possibility. So we put it in there as something you should think about. Let's see. A11, petty auditorium pulpit hearing loop. That's really at your discretion. That's A11. Some of these are really just some of the smaller items. Discretion.
The hearing loop in the petty is important to us just because we're creating a more accessible environment. And obviously for the petty, that's the one program space that we really didn't touch during the renovation. And so that's why the hearing loop was left with it installed. But in order to do the hearing loop, we have to work on the flooring and it makes sense to pull that together with the carpeting. So.
Can you tell me just a little bit about E1? I just don't understand what that means.
So E1, that is where they come in and actually, so on an electrical panel, if there's a loose connection at the panel between the wire and the circuit breaker, it'll actually generate heat. So what you do is you come in the thermal scan those to find the hot spots, literally temperature hot spots at that point to find the loose wires. So you want to clean up your loose wires because they are short. They can do some different things too. So coming in and doing that thermal scan of all your panels is just a way of making sure that all those connections are still tight and still good. And if they're not, you identify them for you. You just happen to have a lot of panels. That's what that's fun. You move around the building.
Other questions from the board? I'm sure as time goes on and we have questions that arise when we take on some of this work, John can provide some more context for what he's seeing.
So Richard, what are our next steps? As you said that there's at least 2 or 3 items that we really need to address in the next year.
Right. So the next steps for me are to work with our building services manager, Tim, and we'll use this document now as a guide. And just like before with our capital asset study that we had for the past 5 years, we didn't tackle everything that was on projected here. As John said, there's some discretion on what we actually can and should do. But we'll do our best to assess what is needed, what makes sense, for us right now, without disrupting services too much, and we'll tackle as much of this as we can within the limitations of our budget for forecast and also how the board feels.
You take this and prioritize which one you want to do first, so we know.
Absolutely, yeah. I can work with Tim and John and have another conversation about maybe just putting that in order. But I do know that the repavement project, that was something that was on our radar many years ago. And we postponed it because of the renovation moving project. We always knew that we were gonna tackle that around this time, so that's something I definitely want to pursue. And then the staff elevator, they certainly want to chances, just take care of that. So.
And keep in mind, some of these things just get taken care of by Tim and his group under the normal budget. So for instance, you'll see in my report that we talked about the fire alarm panel. Well, it's already been replaced, that was that ESCO, so, okay, so Tim was able to take care of that, just get that done, probably within a normal budget at that point, or the report mentions a developing sinkhole next to a manhole in the parking lot, that would be the far north end, coming in here today, Tim's already got that coming. He took care of that, that's been replaced, so, some of these things in the report aren't always big projects, there's things that, okay, just a reminder, Tim, keep this list and get it into a budget for the next few years.
Right, like the keeping the automation system up to date and the site tree trimming, those things that are 10,000 and less are just part of his normal.
Regular
Yeah.
maintenance, right?
And we always have conversations, Tim always has conversations with our HVAC maintenance. We have a preventative maintenance plan, obviously, with them, and they provide that service and have regular testing, so. With some of that stuff, my experience is that it's unpredictable, sometimes something will just go wrong and you couldn't predict it. We'll just have to tackle some of those things as they come, but this at least gives us a basic framework to work with and use some budgeting, budget planning, around. So, it's a very useful tool. I find it invaluable. Wife and I look at it, and Tim looks at it, and so we use it a lot.
Any other questions on this?
No, just echoing what you said, Mark, about having a prioritized list, that would be very helpful for our purposes.
Okay, we don't have to pass it.
No, this is just for the board's benefit and just to make sure that you have some time with John and answer any questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming out. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let me know.
Okay,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, next is the adoption of the 2021 tax.
Yeah, so
Page 29.
as the board discussed last month, I won't go into every detail again, but I think the information before you is represents the good look of where we stand financially. And my feeling, and it sounds like, seemed that the board, for the most part, agreed last month, was that a 0% flat tax levy increase was reasonable and it made sense for us. I wouldn't recommend a decrease in the levy. I don't think an increase is really warranted at this time. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Mike is here as well. But I recommend that the board adopt a 0% increase for the 2021 tax levy.
Any questions or comments?
We talked about it last month, so unless anybody else has questions, I think we're ready.
Okay, we have a consensus. Okay, can I have a motion?
So motion.
0%, second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, it's money, so
Yes.
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 Okay, that passes fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Approval of the revised meeting room policy at page 30.
Yes, and I just want to clarify, sorry to make it clear in the memo. Pages 40 and 41 is the revision. And then pages 42 and 43, that's actually our current policy. So I just put that in there for reference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's not the revision that I'm
Yeah, because
suggesting.
honestly, I was getting
misread it, and I was
confused.
asking, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling
So
you, I was
we're
joking with
replacing-
Gene that I was just keeping you on your toes.
We're replacing that old policy with just this 2-page?
Yes, exactly.
Policy. Oh, okay.
Any
So,
questions or comments? Wow.
When I read the new policy, honestly, it felt a little confusing to me. Like, who can rent these rooms or who can use these rooms? Because they can't use it, of course, for commercial purposes. They can't use it for personal, social.
you'd be surprised, we have a lot of requests that come from the community ranging from, there's so many groups groups of people just want to gather together with people with common interest, perhaps, like a book club or, you know,
Ukulele club?
ukulele club.
Our community foundation board meets here. It's not a fundraiser.
I see, it's,
Right.
right, it's technically not a fundraiser, but it's just discussing
Right.
the business of that foundation.
Community foundation.
Okay.
The local Rotary meets here, has been meeting here this week every.
And the
every
chamber
other
can
week.
still meet here?
The
It's not
chamber
considered to be
executive
for
meetings?
commercial
No,
purposes?
No,
Because no one's selling anything per
Right.
se, right? They're just discussing their
right.
businesses.
And also the chamber, outside of some educational programs for the business community, they have their executive, the board meetings here too. So it's very convenient for me because I just come down the stairs and I'm at the meetings, so. Yeah,
Pleased to
there
hear
are a lot
that
of,
because
there
I
are a lot
think
of,
that's a good use of our spaces here.
there's
for our
really a lot of use and I love seeing the rooms in use, you know, I think especially after the renovation, we want to see the community really take advantage of this resource.
But it's the last paragraph of 41 that gives you flexibility. That's where we had conflicts
Yes.
between what the policy said concretely before and the way we were letting it be used. And that's what I objected to. So this allows some flexibility and allows you to make some exceptions.
Right.
So it's good that
And was this looked at by a lawyer?
Yes, yes.
And I know at our last, when we discussed this the last time, we talked about having the appropriate use act.
Policy?
Policy,
Yeah.
yeah. Somewhere in the vicinity of when we sign up for it or listed on the door. Is that still gonna be available? Is it still part of the form?
Yes, so what we'll do is upon board approval, we'll turn this policy into some form of a request form.
Mhm.
When people fill that out, we'll make sure that they have a copy of the appropriate library use policy. So they understand, here's what is referenced in the policy in the form. And actually, you bring up a good point. I think we need to check with Vanessa, our visual design supervisor, because we used to have a couple of strategic locations where we did have a physical copy of the appropriate library use policy we posted in our building. I'm not sure if we actually got around to putting those back up, so.
Don't think we've done that yet.
any-
It's because all of the signs about masking and safety precautions are using those sign holders.
Oh, okay, so,
Mm,
no, but I mean, even the
There's
smaller
some down
ones,
the wall,
we have the
too.
foam.
Sure, yeah.
So we'll get on that too, and I think in strategic locations, like I said, maybe at the entrances, but also maybe the lead rooms too.
And just in the spirit of accessibility.
Sure.
Are there places where these would be available translated?
The policy or the request?
And the
form or-
forms, like, so
Yeah.
they're available.
We can certainly look into that. I think I think that's a good point because we will have different groups apply and have interest in them. So I think we can definitely look into translating this particular policy in the request form in multiple languages. So Susie can make a note of that and I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Sure. So if there aren't any other questions, I recommend the board's approval. of the
Where
minutes.
where does a person applying find out what the library vision initiative is?
It's on our website. And most people get to this policy through our website or the request form through the website. So I imagine we'll have links to our mission and vision. We'll have links to the appropriate libraries policy. But like I said, we can also have physical copies if people come into the building. Our administrative staff handle the requests and make sure people fill out the form and understand kind of what the expectations are.
Okay, can I have a motion?
Motion to approve the
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next is the designation of FOIA officer and OMA.
So this is kind of a formality, but because of the change in our administrative assistant, now that Susie is here, I'd just like formal approval of making her the FOIA, primary FOIA officer, and also our other admin assistant, Cheryl, who we've all met before, and it would be a good idea to make her a backup. This basically means that they'll receive FOIA requests. I see them as well, obviously, you know, Susie will share them with me, and we'll consult the lawyers if needed to respond to FOIA requests, but Susie will also be required to go through annual training just to refresh the understanding of FOIA, as well as open meetings.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, can we have a motion?
I don't want to get Susie too excited.
So the long business.
I think it's a cool sounding title, FOIA officer.
I like it, I really do.
In that case, I move we designate Cheryl as backup.
Both FOIA and OMA.
Both FOIA and the.
Okay, second. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Next,
Congratulations, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
approval of the administrative succession plan.
So as I mentioned, this is a recommendation, obviously, these are laws, but they're recommendations for standards that public libraries should be able to and be held to. And one of the few things that we didn't have according to the standards is a written succession plan for a key position. And for us, obviously, that's the library director role. So we worked on this administrative succession plan. It's a template that I adapted for our purposes, but it covers what is needed for a plan. I can explain it further if you would like, but it's pretty self-explanatory.
Any questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion to approve the
with this?
And if she's not, we have backup two.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the administrative succession. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Okay, that passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Next is a closed session. Has anybody seen the correspondence?
All
Everyone.
shared with the board.
Just a second, I need to.
We're gonna, well, we have to vote
We
to
have
go
a-
into.
Oh, that's
We
right.
have to have a motion to go into closed session.
So motion to go into closed session